the keys are to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. I'm Anthony Robertson, and here with me is the Horst, Alex Horst. What's up, Horsty?
What's going on, everybody? Good to be here, ready for another exciting show. How you feeling today, guys?
Also here, Alex Asenia. How's it going, Alex?
Doing well, man. Glad to be here, and let's get to this. Let's go.
So if you're listening to this, the 49ers have officially opened training camp. Well, kind of. Santa Clara County definitely approved that the camp, could be open and they could return to practice. But the league and the players union came to some agreements on some changes to training camp, and training camp is going to be different than anything we've ever seen before. So let's run through the schedule a little bit. We got day 1, we got testing and virtual meetings. Days 2 and 3, virtual meetings. Day 4, testing and virtual meetings. Days 5 and 6, physicals. Days 7 through 15, strength and conditioning with a day off. Day 16, practice starts. That's their first day in helmets. And day 21, finally, first day of padded practice. Horst, what jumps out to you about this schedule compared to the normal schedule that the 49ers have?
It's so much different than it used to be, but it was going to have to be different. 1, obviously, because of COVID issues. 2, because they haven't been able to have mini camps. They haven't been able to have team workouts. They haven't been able to do anything at the facility as a team. So it's going to take, looks like 3 weeks for them to make up for that stuff before they can start what would be a normal training camp type situation. They're probably going to need that whole time to get ready for camp. And they've got no preseason games, so that's another thing that they're going to need more on practice time to look at the other guys on the roster that aren't guaranteed to make the team.
Yeah, no, the big thing for me too was a lot of the pros. Like Horst said, the pros for me were the gradual increase, kind of having to differentiate and deviate away from the normal plan. This is a time that I don't think in any of our lifetimes we've ever seen anything like this in terms of what's going on in the world. And so you have to make some pretty drastic changes. So the gradual increase in exposure around other athletes and what's going on, obviously the increase in testing to kind of make sure that everyone's healthy and no one's throwing something about that's going to get the whole team infected and then set us back even further. And then, like you said, the gradual build to, like you had talked about, the first padded practice 21 days out. I get it. It makes sense. Some of the negatives, I didn't feel that the virtual testing for 4 days before, or the virtual meetings for 4 days, I felt that was a little much. I would like to see them getting into more strength and conditioning. Now, I know a lot of that was probably what the players wanted. They wanted less time. Not a big fan of that. I feel like the 2 weeks to get them in shape, both conditioning-wise and physically, getting everyone up to speed and up to par with what the team wants and program would be more beneficial. But the players have been doing this at a higher level much longer than I've ever been doing it in my entire life, so I'm going to kind of defer there, I guess, a little bit to them.
Yeah, it's different. It's a different kind of schedule than anything we've ever seen. And I think, Kyle Shanahan kind of mentioned that, the players have been like independent contractors this year. And they're kind of just doing their own thing, and we have to kind of count on them to be in shape and capable of going through camp. But kind of breaking them in and taking them through steps, through strength and conditioning, and the breakdown, of the beginning of the season, working gradually through. I think it's kind of something that you're used to seeing from if you're a part of sports teams. So I think it makes sense, and I think that, they had to go this route. I think the NFL and the players' union came probably with the best possible plan they could come up with for training camp. Now, the other thing that's coming up that we have to discuss is, Alex, what do you think about this August 3rd opt-out date? Do you think any players are going to opt out, and what are your thoughts on if a player does opt out of the season as of August 3rd?
I definitely think there will be players that opt out. Whether or not any of those guys end up playing for the 49ers is a question that I don't think I have an answer to. I haven't seen anything from any of the guys on that team who would suggest or maybe make it seem like they're going to opt out or not be a part of it. So I don't know if there's a guy on the roster who's going to. I hope not, just because of how close we are to getting where we need to be. This is a year that could turn the tide if we can keep everybody healthy and everyone on the same page and keep improving and growing. So I like the date, though, that August 3rd date, right before the first part of the workout start and the conditioning starts. I think that's a great time for guys who are doing this virtual meetings and these testings. If they start testing positive and are going to have to be around their family, they may feel like this isn't going to be doable for them or plausible, so they can get out before things get too serious, which gives the team plenty of time to find a replacement. I did enjoy the stipulation the league put in, though, that if you're going to opt out, there's no pay. There's no pay if you decide you're not going to play. I think that's going to be in the best interest for teams as well. Because of the decrease in revenue, you're not going to have as much flexibility. So I think it's a nice balance. I think it's a good mix of allowing freedom for the players while also giving the teams the opportunity to make sure they have adjustments and the things they need going forward to make the best decisions for the whole and not just for the individual, because they do need to think about the whole 53-man roster, and they can't just focus solely on one or two guys.
Yeah, I don't mind the whole thing because it's fair. It's just like any other work. You can opt out of working, but you don't get paid. I understand that. If they have family issues or feel like they don't want to make the risk during this time, then they don't have to play, but the teams don't have to pay them. I think that's totally fair. The football fan in me would hope that not very many big name players anywhere in the league do this, because it would water down the season a little bit. But I really hope that none of the big-time 49er players do it, because that would really hurt. But I just think it's fair, and I think they've done a lot better job with this, of including the players and all the decision-making than both MLB and at the NBA. It's been a much better put-together situation by them, is that the Players Association and the player reps have had input on this the whole way, and they came up with this together. And also, if the players do opt out, it's going to be enough time in front for them to find a replacement. Now, obviously, if a George Kittle, a Trent Williams, a player like that were to opt out, you're not going to find as good a replacement. But if you're talking a average starter type player, you could find a replacement for them in the time period.
Yeah, I think the main thing is I don't want to be critical of anyone that decides that they have some sort of health reason or family reason for opting out. We'll be very disappointed if a player opts out, but I don't want to criticize them. In Major League Baseball, there was a lot of criticism of Buster Posey when he decided to step away. But when you really find out what was going on in his life, it makes sense that he had to opt out. And people are facing this every day, and so I don't want to be critical of players that do that. Yeah, of course, I want every single player to play because I'm a huge fan and I want the team to do well, but I don't want guys to have risk family members or children or themselves if they don't have to. So I definitely don't think that we should criticize them for that, but everyone kind of has their own opinion on the players opting out. Now, one of the big changes of the offseason is normally going into training camp, there's going to be 90-man rosters. And according to the new deal that came through with the Players Union and the NFL, the training camp rosters are going to be trimmed from 80 to 90. And teams have two options. They can cut to 80 before the Veterans Report or cut to 80 before August 16th, which I believe is getting really close to the first padded day of practice. So, Horst, what do you think about them cutting to 80, and do we think that that's really going to have an effect on the 49ers training camp roster?
On better teams like the 49ers, I don't think it's as big of a deal because, let's be honest, how many spots are open on that team? Not very many. But if you're a team like the Jaguars, the Jets, an up-and-coming rebuilding team, especially a team maybe with a new coach that's going to give everyone an equal opportunity, that hurts. Those 10 guys would have got a real look from their coach and could have proved something. The other thing that I feel like about this is, man, this is a year where we could use the XFL or the AAF, because there's going to be 320 guys released, and a lot of them aren't going to get the opportunity to show what they can do in camp, and they're not going to be able to put film out of preseason games for other people. So I think this actually shows a need for those other leagues, for places for guys to make film for NFL teams to see. Because with how often undrafted guys do end up being at least decent players, in that group of 320, there's at least a few that are good enough to play in the NFL that just aren't going to get their look. So hopefully those guys keep working, get another chance next year. Maybe go play Arena League. I don't know if that still even exists.
I don't know.
I would imagine it's going to be really hard for them to do something like Arena Leagues, just because a lot of indoor stuff is being limited. And like you said, in those situations too with the Arena Leagues, they're running on small profit margins. This has got to take a big chunk, all this COVID stuff, so it's going to be tough.
So I don't know if there's anywhere for those guys to ball, so they're going to have to, hopefully just stay ready for next year. Maybe they'll still be on whatever team's 90-man they were on's radar and get another opportunity. So I do feel bad for those guys because, like I said, I'm sure there's at least some good ball players in that mix. But for the 49ers specifically, I don't think it's too much an effect. I doubt any of those bottom 10 guys were going to make the team. Maybe the practice squad. But, I mean, how many spots are open? 5, most? Are up for debate? 5 to 8?
All on the roster? Yeah, I mean, there's probably not that many. I mean, I think there's key matchups at different positions. But, I mean, the guys that we're talking about probably aren't going to be in those key matchups. Yeah.
As far as, there's a couple spots where it's this veteran versus this veteran, and if he loses, he might get released. But as far as just open spots on that roster, there's not many.
Yeah. The big thing for me was I was looking at a lot of this is trying to figure out why the 80 number was the big thing for me, is why did they decide on 80? And it looked like for a lot of it was just financial cost perspective stuff, and the big money saved for them was testing. Money on testing. By eliminating 10 guys, that's 10 less tests for each team. Like you said, 300 and some odd players that you don't have to now test on a weekly basis after that date and that day line. But the testing that they're also paying for goes to front office and all of that. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, there's got to be more people in the front office that can work from home. They got to telework. So I feel like that 90 to 80 number is a little steep on the player side. I feel like there's some guys in the front office who don't need to be in the building every day that could probably work from home that you could have shaved and saved a little more money on, or saved money on there and give some of those guys a fighting chance. But like Horst said, for the Niners' purposes, I don't think the 90 to 80 hurts. For us, it's not that big of a deal. The roster is pretty much set. Shanahan kind of knows what he needs and what he's looking for. He knows what guys he's brought in. He knows which guys are going to be the long shots, which guys can go right away to the practice squad that you can cut off and just kind of focus on who's going to make the active roster day one. It sucks for those guys. It really does. And I feel like financially there were other options they probably could have looked at in terms of guys in the front office. Your marketing team probably doesn't need to be in there. There are other guys in the front office who you could have made stay home and not have to test on a daily basis. That could have opened up maybe some of those slots. Maybe you cut it in half and it's 85. But decision's been made. It is what it is. You live to fight another day. Hopefully for those guys in the future here, this isn't something that is long lasting, and they get another shot here in the near future. But until then, a team like us that's got it pretty much figured out, roll forward, do what you got to do. And I think most teams are going to end up taking that August 16th date anyway, rather than before veterans report. They're going to give those guys a little bit of time to show something, and maybe they can do enough in those first few days before practice starts in the strength and conditioning aspect to keep themselves in the running.
Yeah, the August 16th date is pretty close to when they would have made first cuts. You're kind of getting around there. Maybe like a week later they would have made cuts, and they would have went to 75. And I think the NFL actually wanted to go to 75, and the Players Union was fighting to keep more players. I think they were trying to limit the amount of players just to keep the amount of people inside the building to a limited amount. You just don't need to have 90 players if you're not doing preseason games. I think Kyle Shanahan alluded to this, is that, yeah, when you're doing preseason games, you need an entire 90-man roster, and the farther you get along in preseason, the harder it is, to have enough players to play in those games and to execute, training camp successfulally. But with there being no preseason games, there's no need for 90 players. So an 80 number, it's kind of just a number that they came to an agreement, but I think it's more arbitrary. I think they were just trying to limit the amount of players that are inside the building, the amount of players that are out at practice, and without having to do all the preseason games, there's just no need to have a 90-man roster. Now, another thing that the NFL decided to do was to increase practice squads from 12 to 16 players. And there was a couple of caveats with that, but let's discuss that. Is it cool that the 49ers and the NFL teams are going to have the opportunity to keep 4 more players on the practice squad compared to what they would have been able to do in years past, Alex?
Yeah, no, it's a good idea, especially with all this stuff going on with COVID. Number one, like we had talked about, with the cut down of those 10 less guys in the preseason for that practice squad, not practice squad number, but for training camp purposes, having those extra pieces and for the practice squad, those 4 extra guys is huge, because that's 4 extra guys every year. They're going to have at least some semblance of a job and have a chance to work themselves into a roster and get themselves in a position where they're still at least playing football and keeping themselves up to speed. I know a big thing too was that some of those players couldn't falling into other teams, or other teams couldn't sign them, so it makes the practice squad a little more ideal in terms of what they can do with those pieces. But just on the increase in number from that 12 to that 16 number, it just gives you a little more flexibility too with the types of players you can put down there and the types of depth that you can kind of add, because now you can look to keep some guys around, maybe even veteran guys down there, because I know they made some other adjustments that we'll probably talk about in a bit. But it just gives teams a lot more flexibility with what they're going to do with those pieces and who they can put down in that space.
Yeah, I like that they increased it. The obvious reason is probably because of the COVID, and so that they can have a few extra guys in case some guys go down with it. I do enjoy the thing that, 6 players don't have to be 3 years or younger.
Right, so it's 6 players that are now on the practice squad, don't have to have 3 or be under 3 accrued seasons. So they can now be as many seasons as you want. So you could put theoretically somebody like a Travis Benjamin on the practice squad.
So yeah, that basically means you could find 6 positions you're not sure about and keep a veteran. And so the roster battles don't necessarily have to be settled at camp. You could say you're having a tough time deciding between Travis Benjamin and Dante Pettis. And, okay, well, we'll keep Pettis on the roster, keep Travis Benjamin on the practice squad. And if Pettis starts to struggle, you can switch him. And I think that's going to be a big thing for teams, is that because of preseason games aren't going to be there and aren't going to allow people to show how they're fitting in against opponents, that's going to be really important. And it's also with the situation we're in, it's going to be big in case someone goes down with that, because what is it? It's automatic 3 weeks, right? If they test positive.
I don't know if they actually agreed to the 3-week IR.
I think that was the rumor. No. Was that they had they were going to have a 3-week IR for a positive COVID test, so that's big, and that you aren't having to bring up a rookie that's never played in a game. You can bring up a 5-year vet to take a guy's spot.
Yeah, it's a good thought. I think it's going to be interesting to see what actually happens with it, because in theory, it's going to change a lot of the training camp battles. I mean, now you can probably store a younger player on training camp, especially, Alex, I'll let you talk about this in a second, but especially with the 4 on the squad now that's on the practice squad that nobody can touch. So now you can basically have 4 players from that you would normally save on your roster because you don't have because you don't want them to get picked up by another team, and now you can just put them on your practice squad and kind of store them there. I don't know, how many veterans, like long-time veterans, you'll be able to cut and then them say, you know what, yeah, I'll be on the practice squad. I mean, I'm sure there's probably a couple, But I think it's still going to be your Jawan Jennings, your kind of young guys that you're like, I don't know, do we want to keep 7 receivers, 8 receivers? Do we make a decision there now with Jawan Jennings staying on there and maybe keeping Travis Benjamin on the roster, but no, we have someone in case we need him? So I think it's going to be interesting in the future, and I think that them going with the 6 players that can basically play at any length ever is kind of cool, and the 4 players that can't be touched, I think is awesome, because now you can for sure designate 4 guys you would normally have to keep on the roster or sneak on the IR that you wanted to keep, that now you can just put them on that practice squad. They can practice and then be available as games go forward. So, Alex, what do you think about that as far as them holding the 4 and even the 6 with the 3 or less secured seasons?
It's that, like he said, it's that safety blanket, right? So for the guys who have the 6 or more accrued seasons, you can keep them down there on the practice squad. That's just a safety blanket for every team. You got your guys that you trust. If one of them goes down and gets hurt, or you got a couple guys who go on, like he said, to get COVID, have to go on IR if they end up deciding that's the route they want to go with it, or any other variation or deviation off of your starters being able to play. Having those guys in the practice squad that have played, have some vet experience that normally you would have maybe gotten rid of or cut, or in some situations maybe you would have kept them and got rid of the young guy. Instead, you have some flexibility now. It's great. It gives you that stability. It gives you that level of comfort where you can fall back onto them if something happens, which is great, I think, for every team in the league. It's not just like a team like us that's contending. That's great for teams that, maybe they have a great secondary and a great defense. Offense is awful and terrible, but that's what's keeping them competitive in games and keeping them around that 500 number and giving them the actual picture of what their team is. If 2 of their best guys go down now, you can have guys in the forefront sitting there in the practice squad who can come up and maybe stabilize a defense that's now before looked solid, is now rocking and teetering on being atrociously awful. And it gives you a better idea of what your team and your franchise, the direction it's actually going, rather than those 2 guys go down, the team tanks the rest of the way, you win 2 games, and now you're sitting there, with a top 8 pick, and you're not really a top 8 team, and you're sitting there going, well, do we blow this whole thing up, or like, what are we doing here? It helps stabilize, I think. And then the big thing, too, was that keeping guys that can't get signed by other teams. It gives you so much flexibility in terms of just, like you said, stashing and hiding players. And everyone plays those games every year where you got a guy that gets injured and they go on IR for the year, and you're like, well, is he really out for the season, or are you just trying to give this guy some more time to develop? You don't have to necessarily do that now. You can put them on the practice squad. They can get reps. You don't have to worry about them getting taken by somebody else. And like Horst had talked about, you can keep guys around that where you're so deep at positions. You talked about Jawan Jennings, where you're deep at a position, you got a lot of potential there. You don't have to pull the trigger and say you're in or you're out. You can basically go, you're not quite ready yet. We're going to keep you down here. We don't want you to go anywhere else, but we're going to keep you down here, let you develop, let you keep learning, see you on a day-to-day basis without the threat of losing you forever.
Yeah, it's going to make some interesting, 53-man roster decisions and interesting 16-man practice squad decisions, which I can't wait to get into in the future. I think that we're going to have a real conversation because, Horst, when we did 53-man roster, back when we first were doing the breakdown, we were kind of projecting. We had no idea that COVID-19 was going to do what it's doing and what the changes were going to be. So I definitely think that when we get into the 53-man roster and now with the new rules, I know for a fact that I see some changes that I would probably make to the roster. I don't know. Do you see changes you think you're going to end up making?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple changes I would make to the one I made. What was that in February?
That was it was April, I think.
Back in April. Yeah, because it was after the draft.
It was May, yeah.
So it was back in April, May. There's definitely some, had I known these rules were going to exist, some different changes I would have made. Because of another thing, like a guy like Jason Verrett.
Right.
You can keep, if he stays healthy, you can keep him on that veteran part of the practice squad. I mean, there's a perfect example right there of a guy that we might need if someone goes down, but if he doesn't outplay, the top couple guys would probably get released.
Right. I think the argument will be that they're more likely to keep someone like a Jason Verrett on the active roster and maybe put someone like Tim Harris on the practice squad.
Make him one of the blocked guys that you can't go after.
Yeah. Right, because Jason Verrett, he might not accept the role on the practice squad, right? I mean, at his point in his career, you would think that and plus his money's guaranteed. You know what I mean?
True.
So, yeah, but I think these are going to be interesting conversations moving forward.
But, they could pick up a Blake Costanzo.
Yeah, now we're getting into dummy town, okay?
Well, that's the other thing, too, is with all the salary cap changes, too, and we're going to get to this eventually, but with all the salary cap changes, too, this makes it so that these decisions in terms of who you keep on the roster and who you cut and let go, those decisions matter because especially a team like the 49ers with a bunch of free agents coming up, you have to find a way to save some money. And so it may make you pull the trigger on getting rid of guys that before you had no interest or even thought of getting rid of. There was no reason to. It wasn't going to help the team in any way. Some of those guys may not have to go because saving that money is going to be the difference between us keeping guys like Kittle, Williams, in the future here. It keeps them so we can actually afford to pay them in the future and down the line. Guys like Bosa, whose contract's coming up here, well, not yet, but down the road, it's going to be. And there's no guarantee that the salary cap is going to jump up as high as it was projected to pre-COVID. You hope, but you can't put all your eggs in that basket. So you got to start planning for the extremely near future.
But you know what? I'm excited that training camp is starting and that we're at least getting into that point where, hey, you know what? Football's actually going to happen. Finally the agreements happen. Football's happening, and I think moving forward, it's just going to be a lot of cool stories and a lot of fun stuff. Thank God for football. I think we need it. The next episode that you guys are going to be listening to will be coming out on Friday. So when you guys have just finished listening to the 49ers Cutback podcast, we appreciate you listening, and you can find our next episode on Friday. Thank you for listening to the 49ers Cutback podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Google Pods, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Don't forget to click the follow button so you won't miss an episode. You can always follow us on Twitter at 49ers Cutback. We'll be back soon with another great episode. Stay safe and remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.